This is a brief presentation about alcohol policy, and I want to thank my co-author, Diane Schmidt, and mention the focus is mostly on U.S. alcohol policies, and much of the content reflects work undertaken with the support of NADCA and our NIAAA Center grant at the Alcohol Research Group. So I will be talking briefly, very briefly, about the fact that alcohol policies aim to reduce the overall per capita drinking, and they also are aimed to change patterns of drinking. But I'll present just one picture of the overall per capita drinking over the last years, and you can see that there was a high in the 1980s. Then, as certain policies were introduced, it started to decline, and recently it has been sliding upwards with more drinking of spirits and a little bit more wine. This is important because some people believe these long waves are responsive to policies that are put in place, which I'll be talking more about in the next slides. So prevention policies are ones that, as you can see here in these quotes, are designed to reduce risky drinking and to prevent consequences, but policies in the opposite direction, namely loosening of restrictions, can also increase harms. So we want to pay attention to that. And certain policies might also affect ethnic minorities differently and could even increase ethnic minority differences and disparities. So alcohol policies occur at various different levels. For example, federal, state, county, municipal, and also institutional. And then there are different types: legislatively based, enforcement based, and again, organizational policies such as in the workplace or military or schools. And then there are international policies like trade agreements that are important as well. And I'll be talking a little bit about the overall policy environment towards the end. So expert groups have developed pictures of which policies are more effective and which have more research support. And this is just one particular presentation of that, looking at various policies, which you can see on the left. Monopolies are considered effective, taxes are considered particularly effective, and also restrictions on outlet density. And I'll be talking quite a bit about some of these. Not everyone agrees with all of these, but at least there is a fair consensus about these. So starting with some of the policies, one of the most effective policies that is well researched is age restrictions, the minimum legal drinking age. That in 1984 moved to 21 years old across all the states. And that was tied to a federal act that tied enactment of the 21-year-old minimum legal drinking age to receiving highway funds through a federal minimum drinking age act. And that followed some research that showed that states with higher drinking ages of 21 had less harms than those with lower drinking ages. And it significantly reduces car crashes, crime, injuries, and assaults, especially among young people, but also in those just over 21. So this is a quite important policy, and it's well researched. When you talk about the product, the federal government labels alcohol beverages and assures purity, but the different types of alcohol, beer, wine, and spirits, have different ethanol contents, and they're typically taxed differently, with the high ethanol content beverages being taxed at a higher rate. So there are more stringent regulations for spirits, and in fact, there are some places with only beer and wine licensing. So type of beverages is very important from a tax point of view and a control point of view. In terms of price, it's been found that taxes pass on to the consumer in prices, and this is one of the strongly researched areas in which increases in alcohol prices lower consumption, reduce alcohol-related harms such as drink driving, crime, and violence, and premature deaths, and even suicide issues. So This is a very strong overall consumption reduction approach. Of course, reducing taxes could have the opposite effect. When you talk about place, we're talking really about outlet density, limiting hours of sale, and these also have strong support across a number of studies, including some we've done. And also, when you have monopolies, for example, that certainly increases the chance to limit sales to minors because retail monopolies tend to be more strict in terms of checking for ID and so forth. Alcohol promotion and advertising is an important area that's up and coming, especially among vulnerable groups and adolescents, where it's been found that basically advertising has an effect on people's overall expectations about drinking and may increase drinking later on. The workplace, which I mentioned, is important. There are examples of reduction of drinking on the job, and enforcement remains a problem in these areas. Civil aviation is very tight, relatively speaking, and includes potentially employee testing, and that's also true for muni bus drivers, for example. And then we also have to consider employee assistance programs and the issue of parity for addictions and health plans. And those are particularly important areas for both well-researched and increasingly active. I'm going to talk very briefly about a couple of other policy issues. Particularly, I won't be talking much about public policy, but I will say that it can lead to either support among legislators for policies, an example being with the warning label, where policy opinions actually increased after its introduction. And then also policy environments, which are sort of bundles of policies and how they might be effective. So talking mostly about that, a variety of researchers have put together a series of policies, creating a policy score for the policy environment. And there have been some strong findings that when you have more restrictive policy environments in states, you get reductions in binge drinking and a series of harms, including harms to others, like assaults, violence, and even more hardcore problems such as rates of mortality and morbidity. So this is an up-and-coming area of study, and it also is beginning to have a broad basis internationally. So just to summarize, there are a wide range of legislative policies at various jurisdictional levels. Many have been researched very thoroughly, and the efficacy of certain model programs have been shown. As I mentioned, the enforcement remains a troubled area. Policies aren't as effective if they're not enforced, and they are frequently less enforced than they could be. So we need both policies that affect the overall reductions that actually have been found to reduce these harms, and also more situational targeted projects around high drinking settings such as bars, in which server interventions may have a powerful effect if they're mandated. And we need policy development studies that show the opportunities for legislators to make the changes in these policies, which are basically very hard to do. And then there are a series of global burden of disease studies that are helping governments choose practical interventions. That's true both in the US and worldwide. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to give you a very brief overview of alcohol policy and mention again that this is work that has been supported by the National Alcohol Beverage Control Association. And I want to mention that there is a more complete research summary available, and this is the URL associated with that. I want to thank Norman Giesbrecht, who served as an editor for this presentation. Thanks very much.